How to go pro at Yu-Gi-Oh! From scratch. Now, this is an interesting topic and it's been covered in a few different ways. I love Rev's series, where he literally plays Yu-Gi-Oh! From scratch and starts with nothing but a few structure decks and then builds and builds and builds and progresses. Now, the difference between Revs and the average person who's looking to start from scratch is that it's actually very, very good at Yu-Gi-Oh! So how do you start if you're not even good at Yu-Gi-Oh? So I'm going to break down my steps that I think are kind of needed for getting from nothing to going to your first locals and actually getting a few games in. First comes cards, then protection, practice, and play. Now in this order, we should be going from nothing to something alright. When it comes to cards, you've got a question to ask yourself. Are you a returning player or are you brand spanking new? Because the way you approach it should be a little bit different.
Stay tuned for a chance to win everything you see in this video.
I have played this game for a very long time. So when it comes to cards, I have piles and piles and boxes of them. But that means that I have a lot more options when it comes to building a new deck, because I can pull pieces out of old decks, or sometimes old decks get new support and I can whip them out of the old archive and refresh them a little bit. If you've got nothing, where do you start? Well, there's two kinds of cards that you need to consider. You need to consider your main deck, which is like most of your deck, and it's what your whole thing's going to be about. For example, do you want to be summoning the Blue Eyes White Dragon? Then you'd need all the Blue Eyes, you need the fusions, you'd need all that kind of support there. And then there's the other side called staples. Staples are cards that are good in almost every deck or in very many decks. Things like Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. This is a little interruption card. Think of it if you've played another card game like Magic, some kind of counter spell, or any kind of way to interrupt the opponent's play. So these kind of staples are very good. And there's the kind of interruption staples, like I just said with Ash Blossom, things like Infinite Impermanence, which negates a monster's effect once per turn, once per activation. You can play more than one in a turn. So these kind of staples are good at interrupting the opponent. There's also these things called board breakers, things that you might remember like Regeki and Dark Hole or Harpy's Feather Dusters, that if you have a big opponent's board to beat, you can just sweep it off the table and get rid of them. So these are the kinds of cards that you want to get really first, because with these you can build lots of different decks. And if you're not 100% sure what deck you want to play, so getting these staples out of the way is something to do. However, Konami have been very, very good at helping you get both parts recently. Modern structure decks like the Fire King structure deck or the Trap Trick structure deck, or even a little bit the Red Dragon Archery structure deck, have been very good at providing some really important staples, as well as a way to actually play the game with some main deck monsters and some win cons. If you have absolutely no cards, this is probably the quickest and best way to get yourself a bunch of monsters, bunch of spells, bunch of traps, and a bunch of staples at the same time. The best way to choose which one to go for is to go online and start looking at other people's videos and builds and just playing around with what you can do in simulators. When it comes to improving your game, YouTubers have so many resources available to you. We don't have as many articles as some of the other games, but in terms of video content, we are not lacking. You can just Google almost any deck and see a million combos and a million play lines, and it could be that there's decks that you haven't even heard of that you could learn all about. For example, my friend GoldenNova does the lore on so many different decks, and I think that can really help you choose a kind of deck that you like. I like the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime, so I got a bunch of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime decks. I like the storyline from the Albaz lore, so I got the Tri Brigade deck. Luckily, I have a little bit of an advantage because I can summon him here to me. Nova, what kind of thing helps you choose what kinds of decks you want to play? Is it all on lore and art, or do you go in for those mechanics too?
Oh, sorry, I was gonna get some food there. So as for decks that I gravitate towards, I'm not gonna lie, I'm a bit of a meta sheep. I do keep my eyes on what's hot and what's not, but I also want to play things that have stories in them, which is a bit of a balancing act sometimes, but that's been getting easier as time's gone on. If you wanted to play an archetype that was revolving around lore back in the ye olden days, you'd be stuck with something like Worms or Ally of Justice, some real bottom of the barrel content. Nowadays, you've got things like Kashtira and Tearlaments, decks that have run whole formats on their own. I just really like it when the designers put all this work into a story, they make these characters, and they make them worth playing. I can take these characters that I've connected with, and I can bring them into a tournament setting, and how they resonate with me impacts my experience with the game. I don't just win a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! I fusion summon using the power of Albaz and Ecclesia, drawing out their inner powers to defeat the forces that are aligned against us. Like, it builds more of a story than just the competition. Not that that can't be a compelling story on its own. I just like it that way.
There's no need to spend any money on Yu-Gi-Oh! Until you have actually figured out what kind of deck you want to play. It might be that you don't like Fire King. It might be that you prefer the Trap Tricks, in which case go buy 3 copies of the Trap Trick structure deck. Before I buy any deck, what I do is I build it online and I play through a lot of games, and you can use that to identify what the strengths and the weaknesses are of the deck. For our first week of our road to regionals, getting from scrub to pro, I decided to build a deck starting with just 3 copies of the Fire King structure deck. Much like Revs, but I am going to think about it and test it a bit and see what the weaknesses are. So you can see this list, I just cooked it up just out of nothing but 3 copies of the structure deck. I identified some weaknesses. It didn't have amazing spell trap removal. It did not have a lot of ways to recover if you get interrupted, and it didn't have ways to remove cards that can't be destroyed by card effects. So these are things that I've identified as weaknesses. Now, what we can do is either complain about them or we can get a better deck build. So the way to do that at the start is maybe buying some singles or buying some booster packs. If you're feeling brave, you can go down to your local card shop and pop open a few booster packs. Nothing quite hits the same, but you might not get the cards you want. Singles tend to be more affordable because you're not buying lots of packs. However, some of the more expensive singles can go well over £100, and you might need those for your deck. So you're gonna have to decide for yourself whether you want to try and pull them from packs or splash the cash and buy the singles you need. Now, if you're a classic returning player and you might want to check your old cards, then you are going to have to check the Yu-Gi-Oh! Ban list, because it could be that some of your favorites are no longer playable. For example, I have a copy of the ban list right here, so I can just check all of the banned monster spells and traps. For example, if you're a classic player and you want to play your old Pot of Greed, sadly you can't take that to your locals. It is banned, along with a bunch of old monsters and quite new monsters too. There's a real mix that have been banned. So check the list thoroughly and make sure that you're not accidentally bringing something that you're not allowed to play anymore, because you'll lose the match by default. So we built the deck, we tested it online, we identified some weaknesses, we maybe added some new cards, either ones that we pulled from booster packs, singles that we bought. Once you've actually got all of these cards, you need to keep them safe. Now, there's no point spending all this money on cardboard if we go and spill some water on them the same day, which is why we put them in these things called sleeves. The bare minimum in terms of protection is a pack of sleeves. You're going to need some for your main deck, and you're going to want another color for your extra deck probably. So I'll put these in black, put these in red, put them in anything you want. There's loads of colors available and art ones too. They're not very expensive, but there are nicer ones for a higher price. Once you've actually sleeved your cards, you're going to need to get it to locals to play some games. So you're going to probably want to get a deck box too to put them in. Now, this is probably what you could get away with as the bare minimum, but if you'd like to actually have something nicer to play on as well, we have options too. I might get some odd looks if I break out my dual disc at locals, summon Garunix, and ask someone for a game. However, we have another option, a mat. Mats are lovely, they're very clean, and they make sure your cards don't get quite as damaged when you're playing them on the table. They are not as mandatory as sleeves and deck boxes, but after those, this is probably the number one thing you want to get after you've got your deck sorted. This one's a nice white one, but you can get loads of pictures and from different games too. I think this one's quite nice because it's simple, you can use it for other games, whereas I have my very nice Yu-Gi-Oh! Dedicated one, and I have a Digimon one for a very different card game. Now, we built our deck online, we tested it, we changed it, we bought the cards, they're sleeved, they're in the deck box, we have our map, we're ready to play. So now you just need to find your locals and go online and find the nearest place for you to play and start having a go at Yu-Gi-Oh! Everything that we've just talked about, I'm here to help you with. I'm going to be giving away all of the things that I've talked about: a deck, sleeves, mat, box, all for free on Sunday at 6 o'clock. If you join me on my Whatnot stream, all you have to do is watch the stream for the full hour and you'll be entered in the giveaway poll, and you can have a chance to have all of this stuff for free. It saves a hell of a lot of money and will give you your first step into competitive play. Also, you can buy some packs if you want to, but if you want that giveaway, just have to be in chat and be happy and follow, obviously. Also, if you join Whatnot through my referral link, you'll have £10 of free credit that you can spend on packs to upgrade your deck or things from other sellers too. But I just want to make sure that you get the most opportunity to get into the game as cheap as possible. Fire King Pure may not be for me, but I think there's loads of options to either upgrade the deck or sidestep into a different deck. Because I've got those staples, those Imperms, those Ash Blossoms, those Draw and Lockbirds that I could get from this deck and the Traptrix starter deck, I have a lot more options now about where I want to pivot. If I play Fire King again next week, I'll probably move into a Tri-Brigade variant. However, I'm open to suggestions, and I'm maybe going to pick up an entirely new deck for an affordable price. There's loads of really good decks that aren't quite scraping the 300, 600 price mark that some of the Diabell Star package decks are, and I'm excited to explore cheaper options for playing the game. Until then, please like, subscribe, and enjoy the video.